All right, guys, welcome to episode number 18 of the Basecamp Country podcast. My name is Kix Nelson. I'm your host, and I have a co-host with me today by the name of Dean. Dean is the managing broker in Indiana. Super excited to have him on. We also have a special guest with us who I'm going to let Dean introduce. But Dean, how you doing, sir? This episode is brought to you by Basecamp Country Real Estate. If you've ever dreamed of owning your own piece of the great outdoors, now's the time to make it happen. Basecamp Country specializes in buying and selling hunting land, farms, and ranches, and we understand the land and the people who love it. At Basecamp Country, it's more than just dirt, it's a lifestyle. We are land professionals, outdoorsmen and women who know what it's like to walk the woods and work the land and chase big dreams. Whether you're selling property or looking for your own getaway spot, we are here to guide you every step of the way. And hey, if you're looking for more than just land, ever thought about a new career? Basecamp Country is hiring new and experienced agents across the country. So if you're passionate about the outdoors and want to build a lifelong dream of doing what you love, we've got the tools and training to help you succeed. So whether you're buying or selling real estate or starting something new, like a new career, head on over to basecampcountry.com and see how we can help you. And remember, here at Basecamp Country, it's more than just dirt, it's a lifestyle.
No, I'm doing fantastic, Kix. Thanks for having me again, man. Looking forward to this. But yeah, so I invited Michael Bane, a consulting forester from here in Indiana on. Michael's a recent graduate just a few years ago from Purdue University. So he and I have been working together on doing some work here on my own home farm. And I met Michael and had him come out and join our Indiana agents for a get-together over a weekend. I don't know, it's been a couple of years ago now. And ironically, after we got done with that walk and some coaching and education stuff, the owner of the property we were on actually had Michael and his partner come back and do a timber cut later. I think it was that year, the following year. So it's been a great relationship. I use Michael as a great resource for, if a client says, hey, they're thinking about cutting timber on it. I get a hold of Michael and him and Brian. They get out there and they do some work for us. So it's a great relationship to have in this business and our niche, because these guys are the experts in the timberland. And, I always just enjoy talking with them and learning what's new and what's coming back and, what's the future of the timber properties.
Absolutely. Michael, how you doing, man?
I'm good. Thank you for that really, really warm introduction. That helped a lot. As Dean said, I kind of started doing this during college. And then as also stated, I graduated from Purdue in 2021 with my degree in forestry. And this is what I've been doing. This is what I've always wanted to do. And now I'm doing it full time. And it's been a dream. Seldom do people get the opportunity to be outside in the woods every day and, kind of fulfill that childhood desire just to get out and explore. And wow, it's just an absolute blessing. I get to go to some beautiful properties and see some fantastic natural areas in Indiana. The most people may not think of Indiana as the most rich when it comes to natural diversity. It's it really does surprise at times.
Yeah, man. Well, talk to us a little bit about this forestry degree. What made you want to get into that, and kind of, tell us a little bit about exactly what it is you do with the forestry degree.
Yep. Okay, so I'll kind of start with my path and where I started. So ever since I was really young, I've always had a real fondness for the outdoors, and especially trees, timber, that kind of stuff. Most people do. If you're going to have a really romantic connection to the outdoors, it usually involves trees. We see that with everywhere. That's extremely common. And I was always outdoors as a child, and that led to a kind of a real strong interest in things that, you see the people with the DNR at the state fair, and you go to the parks and you talk to the people in the outfits, and it becomes infectious, especially as a child. You think, wow, this is really what I want to get a hold of. And so for as long as I knew what I was, could think about future prospect, it was always, I want to go to Purdue and I want to study forestry. And one thing led to another, and sure enough, I got accepted into the university and went through it and realized that I may not have been as smart as I thought, still graduated, and learned a lot along the way, learned a lot. And during my time at Purdue, I got connected with another consulting forester in the area, and I started working with him. And that I really had no idea what forestry really was. I really wasn't sure. I thought I was going to be working for the state, but then I also learned it could be a consultant. And I thought, well, maybe that's something I'd like to do more, because I don't really know how fond I am of working for the state and all the everything involved with that. We all kind of know what I'm saying there. So I I went down this consulting route instead, and it was an immediate trial by fire. I had no idea what I was really signing up for, and I got out there and I learned that foresters do a lot more than just kind of walking through the woods and looking at trees. We so to kind of go through our year in a cyclical style, we kind of in the springtime we start with our tree planting season. We do large scale reclamation work, which is crop fields, particularly fallow fields, pastures, things like that are no longer productive, or the landowner is no longer interested in using for means of agricultural production. And we move to my favorite kind of agricultural production, which is timber. And so we have a setter that goes behind a tractor. It looks a lot like a tobacco setter or a tomato planter. If you've kind of seen that, it can give you a good idea of what we're working with here. It goes behind a tractor with a single plow on the bottom and opens up a trench, and we plant little tiny tree seedlings. These are all year-old trees. Most states have their own nurseries, and our state is no exception. We have our own state nursery down in Valonia, Indiana, and that is where all these seedlings come from for the restoration work. They come in bundles of 100, and it's all of our premier native hardwoods that are in either short supply or otherwise financially quite valuable. And we do a bunch of that planting in the spring. About tens of thousands of trees are going in the ground. Then from there, we move into doing our summertime work, which is invasive species management. Invasive species management is the most important thing you can possibly do in your woodland, or any wild area that you manage, no matter where you're at, is managing invasive species. Invasive species break the entire ecosystem. There is no room for them in a native ecosystem, and there is no room for them in a managed ecosystem, especially. The trees, at least in our area, are negatively impacted by these invasive species. They prevent regeneration because they build up in the understory and produce a layer that no longer allows the sunlight to penetrate to the ground. And when that happens, you have you break the system. The trees can no longer regenerate. As the trees get older, die, phase out, they're replaced with whatever's growing underneath them. And the majority of these woods, especially in east central Indiana here, that's a mere honeysuckle. It fills in aggressively, and we do that kind of treatment all summer long. Hundreds of acres. We did a little over 800 this year. And that's all foliar spraying is how we do it. There's multiple methods for attacking it. If you're doing it on your own, you can hand cut it with a chainsaw and treat the stumps. You can use smaller sprayers. We have a large industrial style sprayers, designed more for lawn care. They go in the back of trucks. They're hundreds of gallons with large hose reels and stuff like that. We can get more into the weeds with that later when it comes to invasive species management and how critical that is, because that's a large conversation I can have. But continuing with kind of our seasonality as foresters, after that, we typically have some time to sell timber. Now, selling timber is interesting as a forester because we're acting as a middleman or a broker per se to we will go to somebody who solicits us, a landowner, and they want to sell timber. They want to do something for their woods. That's always what I kind of ask as a forester as well. What do you want to do? What's your plan? What's your, what do you want? Do you just want to make money? Do you want to encourage wildlife? Do you want to have really beautiful fall colors? What do you want to do? And so once I kind of get that under wraps, I can go to them and mark a suite of trees. And these trees I mark, they're ones that I view should be removed from the stand. So usually this is, we can get into silviculture later too, but this is all a whole bunch of undesirable trees, non-valuable trees, low merchantability, low wildlife value, stuff like that. These are the trees I target first. I want to get them out of there, especially shade-tolerant species. I have no room in my palette as a forester for any kind of shade tolerance.
Hey, Michael, what would you classify as a shade tolerant tree?
So we can get into that. So this is the cornerstone of forestry. I don't care where you're at. You can be in Utah, you can be in Indiana, you can be in Maine, you can be in Germany. There's forestry is all the same, and it's a battle between two different modes of operation. So trees can either be shade intolerant or shade tolerant. Shade tolerant trees build up in the understory. They don't have to have direct sunlight. In our area of the world, trees that are shade tolerant would be the two big ones are sugar maple and American beech. Those two trees are remarkably shade tolerant. They can grow in full shade. They stand there and persist and persist and persist, waiting for an overstory tree to die, tip, something happen, and then they they erupt. The light hits that next layer of that cake, per se. If you have your overstory, and then we're looking at a side profile of a forest here, and you move down and you'll see these mid-height trees through it. That's the mid-story, and those are typically almost always made up of shade-tolerant species. Then you have your understory. So as a forester, a lot of these woods have been visited other times in their life, and all these woodlands, at least in our area, grew up within the last since the turn of the century, more or less. And as that happened, our early shade-intolerant pioneers, which would be trees like black cherry, tulip poplar, the majority of your oaks, your walnuts, your hickories, anything you could think of as a super desirable hardwood, with the exception of maple that you would buy in a store, are all shade-intolerant hardwoods. And so that, as they progress, since, and this is a whole other conversation, but since our woodlands, their historic management scheme has been broken, they can't replace themselves. These shade-intolerant species, they just can't. They have a closed canopy. There's no chance for them to regenerate underneath themselves. And then eventually, with time, with plucking, you pick the high-quality trees out, you pick a couple more, and you pick some more. And then over 60 years, the vast majority of that original overstory that developed when that woods grew is gone. And what has it been replaced with? It's been replaced with sugar maple and beech and other undesirable species that were shade-tolerant and were able to persist in that understory. And then, once again, the top was cut off of it. That second growth, or that second layer in that cake, was released. And now you have an overstory of shade-tolerant species that are usually of very low value. So that's kind of the central dogma, I guess you would say, of forestry in a sense, is how do you interrupt that? How do you break that cycle? How do you keep these more desirable trees in the stand? And so that's usually the first thing on my list, is to go out and mark as many of these large shade-tolerant trees as I possibly can, and get them out of the woods. Completely change the direction this thing's going in. You got to pull the seed source to stop that regeneration from happening of these shade-tolerant species. So once I go in there and mark that, I typically mark all the trees that also you'd mark trees of a low quality, poor form, things like that are just simply not going to make it to that next cycle. And I'm describing this as if it's a woods that I've just walked into, and this is a long-term management scheme here. We are going to fully turn the direction of this. Let's say we have for the sake of this conversation, somebody's quite interested in deer management. And, a woods full of sugar maple and beech produces essentially no forage on a per acre basis. And what is negligible or completely unpalatable to deer. And a well-managed, extremely productive woods full of shade-intolerant species of the regeneration of them as an overstory mass species like oak, chinkapin oak, one a good one we can think of. Oaks are a premier browse species. Something near 70% of a deer's diet's native plants. Oak is a preferred browse. But there are seldom young trees like that in the woods. And so my whole scheme of stirring it up, opening these holes, and getting sunlight to the ground is kind of the direction that all this goes in my head before I start, is how can I get the light in the ground in this woods, and how I can do it to the most effective degree. And then this leads me into the next part of what you do as a forester. And as a forester, our next job, and what you should always do after you harvest timber, is do timber stand improvement or forest stand improvement. It goes by either name. Both are very common. And that is now where I combat that mid-story, that shade tolerance. That is all what's coming next. So I've ripped the overstory out of this woods. Let's say it's got a bunch of maple in it. The maple's now gone. It's at the mill, and it's turned into cabinets. Now I got this mid-story maple that's not merchantable. It's too small, so for our area, it's under 15 inches in diameter. Further south, you get a pulp market, and it can be even smaller than that. You can sell trees. I would dream of being able to sell 12-inch maple. So now I go through with a chainsaw and some herbicide, and I kill all these shade-tolerant trees that have built up in my regeneration openings. Let's say I went and I marked maybe 50 or so maple in one big patch and opened up a 3 to 4 acre hole in this woods. And now I want to do that next step. And that would be to completely remove that second layer in there and have sun hitting the ground. Now that I have sun hitting the ground, any neighboring tree in there that is a shade intolerant tree that's in the overstory, its seed is going to hit that spot, germinate, take off. And now I've successfully regenerated a cohort of shade intolerant species that are most likely economically valuable. This goes on typically 100-year cycles, because in Indiana, our trees, it's usually about 100 years to financial maturity. Depends on the species. Tulip can do it in 40 to 60 years. Hickory, one day, it'll get there. It'll get there. And that's so that kind of sums up in a very broad way. That's the vast majority of what a consulting forester does in a year. Other foresters, or some foresters, do a lot more habitat work, a lot more early succession, so doing prairies, grasses, that kind of stuff. Some venture into doing food plots. Any spectrum of habitat work, a lot of foresters dabble in it. It's just the next natural progression, as I have gotten my red card and am into prescribed burning now. Prescribed burning and its benefits are undeniable, to say the least. That's something else I'd like to talk about, at least at some point, just because it's fantastic for wildlife. And then I've also gotten into doing the prairies and the warm season grasses too, just because there's a big demand for it. And the USDA is putting out a lot of money into those types of programs because it has now become evident how critical they are for habitat. But so that's my very long-winded spiel that every landowner I visit gets. That's just the start. But
well, let's step back a little bit here and talk about some invasive species stuff, because I know there's going to be a lot of people that have a lot of questions about that exact thing right there. So why don't we just start out with that? To put it in layman's terms for people like me that don't know what they're talking about. What are some of the major invasive species that we deal with?
I'm just going to worry about woody invasives for this conversation. There's a whole herbaceous plant issue out there too, but that's a huge conversation. So the biggest one, at least in the north, I know the further south you get, you kind of lose it, but up here we have Amur honeysuckle. Amur honeysuckle is the main species, and it was imported mainly for wildlife. But it turns out the fruit on it is remarkably non-nutritious for birds. There's a lot of issues with our neotropicals as they migrate across the Gulf of Mexico. They're simply not making it because their main food source is honeysuckle fruit, and it's extremely low in fats. And it dominates in the woods with unparalleled aggression. These bushes are growing. Instead of think of trees growing inches a year, these are growing feet a year in the woods. It becomes a monoculture. It starts in just a very small plants sprinkled through the woods, and then they all start to go. And then the more you log and the more you disturb without any further management is causing that just to get accelerated. It just keeps going faster every time. It's another notch, and they start to dominate. And without a doubt, eventually they become like a large portion of the woods in this area of the world are, and it's full of honeysuckle that's 15 to 20 feet tall. If you're in the south, you can probably equate that to privet. Privet is wicked down there, and it is extremely aggressive. I think it would be the appropriate comparison to Amur honeysuckle. We get that's enemy number one. It's easy to control, thankfully, but it's extremely expensive to control because of the issues with how many there are. Just the scope, the size, and the scope of this work is overwhelming, to say the least. Next,
how many acres in a day of that can you treat usually, Michael, when you guys are doing the chemical application?
How many acres in a
day when you guys are honeysuckle?
10 a piece, maybe 10 to 15. Depends. If it's really thick, we're talking 3 to 4. If it's moderate infestation, 10 is pretty good. That's usually what we shoot for. A lot of them get so bad though that you're 3 and 4 acres a day is all you can possibly get through, because you're spraying the entire woods for all intents and purposes. You're spraying 2 different layers of the woods all at the same time, and it's remarkably inhibitory to progress, I guess I would say. After that one, which is that's public enemy number one in the woods around here, we have our own species of privet, blunt-leaved privet, which is can get aggressive in waterways and wetlands, and I've seen some remarkable patches of it, but nothing that's extremely concerning like honeysuckle, not woodland level destruction, but it can still be an issue. We have a autumn olive, which is a bit less shade tolerant, but it can still occur on the borders of woods or in more thinly canopied woods. It can start to become an issue. Autumn olive is harder to control. It's better to cut it instead of foliar spray. And then there's a whole suite of chemicals. Typically, the more nasty growth regulators do quite well on that. Every species mentioned to present are all easily controlled with Roundup glyphosate. And then one of the newest kids on the block is burning bush. Burning bush is in every landscape least in the northern states. I'm sure it's the same in the southern. It's it's becoming an issue. It's extremely hard to control. It is remarkably hard to kill with foliar spray. Cutting works well, but in the infestations I've been seeing recently, and the increase in infestations, it's concerning because it's just not easy to control on a landscape scale. If you have, maybe a couple 20, 30, 40 bushes in your woods, yeah, that's easy to control. But when we're talking of, thousands, the scope on that becomes overwhelming. It's extremely hard to control. It's just as shade tolerant as honeysuckle, and it grows just as aggressively. Moving on from that,
seeing that at in East Central Indiana,
further south in East Central Indiana, we're starting to pick it up this way some more towards this area. It moves into most, as most things do, it really likes to move into the most disturbed woodlands first, and typically gets held out of really well-developed woodlands the longest. It's coming, and especially once I go back into woods where we've treated remarkable honeysuckle infestations, and now have come back and see what else is naturalizing. Now the honeysuckle's gone. Well, what shows up? Well, more honeysuckle, obviously, and then a whole bunch of burning bush. Thankfully, deer do browse it, which is not a way to be okay with it being in your woods, but it does help to kind of keep it at bay in some areas with extremely high deer pressure. I have noticed significant browse on it. But once you reach a certain tipping point, you can no longer rely on that to suppress it, because you're just going to outgrow what they can possibly eat. And then the final big one of our woody shrubs would be Japanese barberry. Japanese barberry is an extreme issue. If anybody's listening from out east, like more towards Pennsylvania, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is wild out there. Barberry is wicked. It takes over with remarkable speed. It's short. Fortunately, it doesn't get much over. It's not like a honeysuckle. It's going to be 15 feet tall. It is reasonably easy to control, but that is an emerging pest that is going to become much, much more of a in our face issue probably within the next 20 years, at least in this state. That's not something that's regulated through any terrestrial plant rules really in this area that I am aware of, and it's still widely planted. It does harbor more ticks. For some reason, I'm not exactly sure why, but that's what I've read in the research. It does harbor more ticks. Barberry's going to become quite problematic. It makes it hard to navigate through the woods. Yeah. Anything with thorns is really one of the worst invasives. We do also have multiflora rose. Multiflora rose gets in reasonably open woodlands and is very easy to control. Those are our big ones in this area. Further south, you have all sorts of other fantastic exotics that do really good jobs taking over as well. And I'm quite glad I don't live in areas with kudzu and mandinia and stuff like that. I have no desire to work with those other species.
Battles to fight here in East
Yes,
Central
absolutely.
Indiana,
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we had two of them wonderful Bradford pears in my yard up until last year. And we found out that the state of Missouri Conservation Department actually has a program where if you have one of those trees in your yard, if you cut down that tree and send them a picture of it, they will give you a tree to replace it with. And so that was pretty cool. Yep.
Those replacement programs, I've heard quite a few of those in the counties, at least in Indiana. I've heard those for Tippecanoe, a lot of the ones around Indianapolis and that area, and then around the Republic of Bloomington. There's quite a bit down there as well, where they've been working to swap these trees out of people's yards. And I think that's fantastic. That's the only way you're going to get people to do it, is say, here, look at this really nice alternative. Plant a serviceberry or a flowering dogwood or something like that. I think flowering dogwood's your state tree down there. I think so.
Yeah, I'm not real sure, to be honest with you. Sounds right.
Oh.
Yeah, so we did that, man, and we got it. We had two of them, and I wish they would have gave us two trees to replace it, but they didn't. So we just got one. We replaced one of them.
Anything helps. Anything helps. And kind of with that whole, just continue with this.
I did cut both of them down.
Good. That's that's what we usually say is the best way to prune a Bradford pear is one cut at ground level.
Yep.
And I really look hard at ones in parking lots and residential areas. I just look at them. I think, man, it's just, under the cover of night, an electric chainsaw, some kind of basal herbicide application to the bark, and nobody would ever know, and it just wouldn't wake up in the spring. They bother me so much. I hate seeing them out. It's just
most people are just not educated about it. I didn't know much about it
really?
until that many years ago that was considered an invasive. So it's another one of those educational things that again, somebody brought it in. It was pretty, flowers spring. They didn't realize what they're biting off, and I mean that's where the honeysuckle bush come into. I mean, I was talking with Pat McFadden about it not that long ago, and there's several different places that had influence of getting that brought here. So
the majority of our terrible invasives all come from Asia, and they come from the Amur region of Asia and also a portion of Russia. And that area of Eastern Asia was conjoined for a very long time in geologic time, I guess, back before the continents divided too much, with the eastern part of North America. And that's called the Eastern North American Floristic Disjunction. And that's why a lot of these nasty invasives we have all come from the exact same area of the world. And it's because their habitat, their climate is remarkably similar to ours. It's not quite as cold, and it doesn't quite get as dry in the summers, but generally it follows the same climatic trends that we do in this area. Hence why, a lot of these species have living members of the same genus in our part of the world. We have native honeysuckles. We have native members of the genus Lonicera. We have native bittersweets. We have a native barberry. We have native all sorts of stuff. And they're all fantastic plants. They're just not as refined in horticulture. We have native burning bushes. All the options are out here for that native plant, movement to start. You could really convince people to use these native alternatives that are, in my opinion, just as beautiful. There's so many options like that, and they're similar. They're similar plants. They have similar flowers, similar fruit, similar leaves. It's all out there.
The invasive topic is just so broad, and you can go so far with it. And in our area here, the honeysuckle is just so. I haven't seen the burning bush like Michael's talked about. He and I've talked about that one a couple of times. It seems like that's about a little further south for me where they're seeing that at. But the honeysuckle in this area is just so overwhelming that I'm working on it on my farm. I'm on this spring will be my third year of the EQIP program, which I'd like Michael to talk about just a little bit and how that works and how they work with the landowner to make that program work. That's a government program for landowners. Is, the first year we went in and tried to do a lot of spraying, got to it just late enough that it was a drought year. So the bushes were already going into a little bit of a dormant state, and we didn't have a lot of success with that treatment. And Michael and I actually talked that year, and they were having the same problem. So the next year, which would have been this last spring, I went back in and I used a big forestry head on a skid loader and spent, I don't even know how many hours in the woods, literally just grinding those 15, 20-foot bushes. They look like a tree, but they're a bush, obviously. But some of them, the trunks were, by the time you get 5 or 6 branches that meet at a common base, it's, 1.5 feet, 2 foot in diameter. And you got to grind it all the way down to the ground the best you can. And did a lot of that last year. This spring will be the third year, and I've got to really get on the spraying this year. I've got it knocked down, but it already was starting to stump sprout and do a little bit, like Michael said, it grows not inches a year, it grows feet. So you'll have nothing to start with, and you'll walk out in the woods what seems like a week or two later, and it'll have 2-3 foot of growth shooting up of a sucker shooting up. So this spring, that'll be my third and major year of the chemical application and spraying all the regrowth. And I've got a little bit of other that I didn't get everything. I left some strategically where in some areas to kind of block for visual, but I sprayed it. So now I've got the skeleton standing there of the bush that I'll work on grinding down this year while I'm doing chemical application. But that was something I really wanted Michael to touch on and help explain, is some of these government programs that are out there for landowners that they don't have to do the work. They just have to sign up for the program, and then they can hire consulting foresters and folks in that industry to actually come do the work. They know the chemicals that work best, the mixtures of chemicals that may be needed to really get some of these hard to kill species done. And Michael has been doing this in the field for a while, and he actually turned me on to one this year for thistles, because in the thistles in my area, I'm having problems getting to really kill. They'll burn down, but they'll regrow. It doesn't actually do a full kill. And Michael shared a chemical with me that he'd been using and having a lot of success with. and I went and bought some. It's really expensive. It only takes, what was it, Michael? 5 ounces for 20 gallons.
Yep.
And I mean, so very low usage rate, but it did exactly what he said. It killed those thistles all the way down. So sometimes, when you're battling these things as a landowner, they're getting to have a little bit more and more chemical, resistance to things. And sometimes you just got to change the chemical or the component of it. And then you get the kill rate and the things you want to accomplish actually get done. Instead of spraying the thistles 2-3 times a year for some years, this year I sprayed them once, and almost all of them were one and done. So that was, that for me, even though it was a pretty expensive chemical, it was money and, time well spent. Instead of going back 3-4 times to do it, it was a one and done. So, but yeah, Michael, help me with explaining what the EQIP program is here in Indiana and how it applies to you and some of the landowners.
So there's a multitude of programs that are available to landowners, and they're all provided through the USDA and the in your local NRCS. These offices, there's one in every county, and they would be what's classically called like your FSA, your Farm Service Agency. They have the NRCS side, and that administers all these grant programs for landowners, for private landowners that want to do something to improve the environment or conservation-minded practices within their property. The big one that sucks a whole bunch of money is invasive species management. And these programs for the EQIP, it is called, or that's the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And then within that, you have Practice 314. And Practice 314 is brush management. Brush management is a 3-year project. And what you do during that time is you remove, at least for our part of the world, since these are nationwide programs, for our part of the world, this is going to be geared at honeysuckle, our woodland invasives. So there's a cutoff time each year for their fiscal year in December when it comes to putting in an application. But if this is something you'd be interested in as a landowner, and you say, wow, I've got 40 acres and there's no way I can do this by myself, you can go and you can apply, and there's a massive array of things you can apply for that you probably had no idea existed to help you with all these conservation concerns on your property. And if you can address those, they will, first you have to get an application in, and then they will poll every spring, usually in March. This is how it works in my state. This could vary state to state. I have no idea. And usually in March, they start drawing names who got their application approved. And then at that point, preferably before that point, you would be attempting to find a contractor who can do it, that is licensed to spray in their state. And you would meet with them and kind of start to get a quote, things like that. The cost sharing program attempts to cover about 75% of the regional average cost. Depending on your property, it can vary wildly. If the access is good, if the invasives are horrible, was it inspected and put in the correct brackets, all sorts of issues go into this that affect the price. And it's the price can be inhibitory. I mean, there's a lot of these places that, if you had to pay for it on your own, it's a big bite to take, I guess you would say. And so these type of programs are critical. Over 80% of the work I do is cost shared when it comes to things like this. It just has to be, and I'm glad it exists because it's a massive benefit for private landowners. And that same token, as a private landowner, if you want to get the cost share funding and do the work yourself, you can. There is no reason why you cannot do that work yourself. A lot of these, there are multiple programs, and many of them pay quite well to do what you're wanting to do, and it can work.
Well, yeah, and that's what we're doing. I use you as a resource, for information, and I've got a couple friends that do a lot of this kind of habitat work and government program work and stuff. And yeah, well, I'm, just to your point, we went through the whole process, got chosen. Ours, we added a pollinator piece to it, so it kind of moved us up the ladder of get chosen. So the pollinator and the invasive, it was a 3-year program for the invasive, and then the pollinator was the planning, and they reimburse you for costs and stuff. But yeah, it's a wonderful program, and you're right, it covers a lot of the costs and makes it worth your time if you're going to do it as a landowner. For you, obviously, you're getting paid for the full price, but the landowner, for if they really want to make an impact on their land, having you guys come out and doing it, it only costs them 20-25%, whatever that percentage works out to be. If you really want to try to do something to benefit your woodlands and stuff, it's a wonderful program. I know several people that have used it. I know some that are actually in the application process right now down south of here in Franklin County. I know a couple of working on it. So those government programs are out there. And to your point, there's so many that do different things. I know we live on a farm, so sometimes they do waterway programs for, storing and actually creating waterways. We've used that one, putting in field tile. There was one a couple of years ago for doing that cost share. So you never know for sure what all is out there. So the easiest thing people can do, I just tell them, new landowners, is go talk to your office, your local, FSA office, or FSA, NRCS office, talk to them about it and just find out. Just ask, because they change regularly. Every county's budget is different. So it's not a paintbrush. It's not a one size fits all. Just go spend some time with them. They're a wonderful resource. They have a wealth of knowledge. Most of them are, like you, went to college for something specifically in those industries. So they're, one of our agents, Josh Ember over in Ohio, he works in the soil and water piece of it. So, it's ever changing and evolving. And that's what I always tell the folks that I'm working with that are buying maybe their first piece of land is, go meet those folks, get acquainted with them and let them know that you're interested and let them help guide you, because you don't, like you said, they've got a goal. What are they think they want to do with it? And then, try to start working some of those things into your land management, your land ownership, and to help pay for it. I mean, no sense, as a landowner.
Oh, absolutely.
Why that's there to use. I mean, yes, they have guidelines and there's some things you got to do. You got to check your boxes. But as a landowner, why wouldn't you want, if it's there and, to help, get to your goal, by all means. I think actually our, Tom James, our national sales manager, his farm, I think he's starting to use some of those programs on his farm, and he's been doing TSI and all the invasive work for, seems like he's had that farm 20 plus years. So, he's starting to see that, heck, it's already out there. You're already doing it. Why not go ahead and get some cost share with it and make it worth everybody's while?
Yep, absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about how to identify some of these species. Like, I think a lot of people will have some questions on that. Like, what's the easiest way for people, to start learning? You walk out here in these woods and, don't know a white oak from a black oak from whatever. What's the easiest way to start learning that and and studying on that, if you got some advice on?
So for your for learning all your native tree species, one of your best options is going to be look to your local or your whatever your state's land grant university is. They probably have some really good publications about tree, native plant identification, anything along those lines. And just get some guides and learn your basics and start going out there and kind of, go up to a tree and don't leave it till you figure out what it is, and eventually you'll start to notice these themes. Thankfully, humans are really good at identifying patterns. And so, that's what, in the wintertime, I'm out in the woods and I identify all the trees by bark. The bark patterns are unique to every individual species. Now, there are some that look similar to one another, and I do get confused from time to time. But, it's one of those things where just practice makes perfect. You have to start learning it. And you can learn really basic things about it to help really get your mind start working as a dichotomous key to kind of know where you're going when you look at a species. Like if you look at a tree and, plants have multiple options for branching. The two most common are opposite and alternate. So if you have limbs and leaves that are coming out from main stems across from each other, that would be an opposite pattern. Maples, ashes, dogwoods, buckeyes, those all use that common pattern. And then the alternating pattern, where they alternate up the twig, those are your elms, oaks, hickories, tulip, poplar, cherry. Basically every other species fits into that alternate pattern. So if you can start noticing keys like that and common shapes of leaves, so you say, well, this is a maple. I know this is at least an oak of some capacity. This is probably a hickory. If you can just get down to genus level, that's pretty good. For all intents and purposes, do you really have to be able to tell that this is a black hickory or a pignut? No, I mean, if you're really into it, sure, yeah, that's fine. The differentiating all the different red oaks and stuff can get really in the weeds, and not to mention all these species hybridize aggressively within their own genus. A lot of them do oaks, hickories. They're really bad about it. So you can get some wild trees out there that you just really have no idea what they are, other than, this is in the red oak group, and it looks like it's at least probably based off some kind of a northern red or a Shumards or a southern red, or the further south you get, we get vastly more species diversity. So if you're in Appalachia, Alabama, somewhere down in that in the good deep south, you're going to have remarkable oak remarkable oak diversity. There's just it's fantastic. Up here, there's still a lot of species, but like I said, if you can start working into that, using a guide, getting familiar with like the base, like learn true white oak, and then start to figure out how all the other white oak species fit into that group. Learn the acorn styles for how that works. Look at the leaves. Bristled tips for red oaks and rounded lobes for white oaks. All sorts of stuff like that. Look under the tree. Is this a hickory or an ash? Well, look under it, and if there's hickory nuts, it's going to help you a lot. Comparing also just all sorts of stuff like that. Cottonwood, know to look for the trembling leaves and the breeze because of their D-shaped petioles. Just stuff like that. And the more you read the books and read these little field guides and stuff, it becomes more and more obvious. They put all these little easy ways to remember it in there. It's a lot of those are that's the best way to learn it. Unless you're going to school. I took a whole dendrology course, for learning our native trees and shrubs, and that's a whole semester, and you have to learn it. It's fourth grade for this, but it's out and about. I'm sure it's a lot more enjoyable to do it that way when it's on your own property. But, and then there's plenty of, especially on Facebook, there's really good tree identification groups you can join. So if you just really have no idea what it is, throw it on there and people will know what it is almost instantly. Those are some really good resources as well. So there's a plethora of options, but the biggest thing is just getting out there and looking for trends, looking for patterns, figuring out your own ways to identify these trees. So
I downloaded an app, Tree ID app, and years ago. And I've gotten pretty good at identifying trees in my area, but man, that app that I downloaded 4 or 5 years ago, it was quite the help, man, because it wasn't 100% accurate all the time, I don't think, but it really, it was cool because you could take a picture of the tree and the tree bark or whatever, and then it would pull up and you could compare it. And then just doing that, I'm a very visual learner, so doing that for me really helped me a lot.
Absolutely. There's a lot of those apps that are really useful. I personally prefer anything based around iNaturalist. That's a very good resource that allows for kind of community identification and stuff, and it's reasonably accurate. I struggle to find any app that works really well on bark, which is to be expected. That's quite the challenge. Usually if you can get a leaf or a flower, depending on the species, things like that, those are much more diagnostic and can get you kind of going in the right direction. And even looking at twigs, if you just have a tree in the winter and you see the twig and that's all you have, most trees have twigs that are very identifiable, at least to their genus and their family. So, you can look at something and clearly tell based on pictures online, this is a buckeye, this is an ash, things like that. And you can still look for those same branching patterns. So there's every part of the tree is diagnostic, but yes, the apps are fantastic as well if you can use them correctly to get guided in really good directions.
I wish they'd have had those apps back in 1994 when I was going through my dendrology class. Made life so much more fun.
I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty handy.
Yeah, but it's a wonderful tool nowadays. Right? It just shortens the learning curve for people. It's another resource. That was one of my favorite classes in college was dendrology, field biology, and ornithology. Learning the birds, the trees, and all the critters.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Guys, we got a pretty good show going here, and I've got a meeting that I've got to get out here in about 20 minutes. So let's get our final thoughts in here. Dean, you want to jump in here on some last final stuff?
No, that's for me, just information sharing and the resources that the landowners have available to them. You've got your consulting foresters like Michael that are kind of in the private field, if you will, but you've also, most states got regional foresters that work for the DNR. Those are free resources. You call them up, they'll come out to your property. They're part of the programs also. They usually got to come out and do an evaluation of the program. Do you fit what the model is and such? So, as a landowner, utilize the resources that are available to you, that are around you. Like I said, I call Michael, text him on a regular basis about stuff, what's going on in the markets and that kind of stuff. But there, the offices for the NRCS, your regional foresters, there's regional biologists for the state. There's tons and tons of resources that are available. As a landowner, as you're learning something or you want to learn something, just don't be afraid to reach out to them because they're excited to show up. Michael is one of the most energetic people I've ever met about forestry and everything involved with it is, they love to share. And that's part of what, I think why they really do it is they love the teaching and sharing and helping people get to where their end goals are. So don't just use those resources when they're available, and they're readily available. You just gotta pick up the phone.
Yep, absolutely.
Michael, I got to get you hooked up with a buddy of mine, Richard Sturts. Richard was a forester for the Missouri Department of Conservation down here for 30 years. He retired now. That guy's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that kind of stuff too. You guys would have a hell of a conversation, I'm sure.
Oh, I can talk about this for a for a really long time, so that will never be a problem. But
I did have one last question here on those programs you guys are talking about. Is there, and you may not know the answer to the question, but is there a minimum land requirement to be eligible for that?
Realm of possibilities, at least in terms of classified forest, is 10 acres. That usually seems to be the magic number in most states and with most jurisdictions and stuff like that. I know if you get involved in Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, you can, there are less restrictive stipulations about acreage. You can get into smaller acreage with these alternative types of plans. They do a lot of urban work. So if you have an acre or two, like in the city, that is really, 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 really valuable habitat. And the government views it as such, and they throw a bunch of money at that to kind of revitalize these more urban habitats, just to create these more green spaces, So there's definitely a possibility for that. I'm sure under a lot of programs are going to be looked upon less favorably, but it all depends. Your local people can tell you way more about this. My understanding of these government programs is infantile, to say the least. I truly just know what I'm involved with and kind of scratching the surface on it, and that's it. So like Dean said, talking to these people is critical. They are wealth of knowledge, and they are there to help you. They're public servants. So
fair enough. Well, Michael, I appreciate you coming on, man. You got any final thoughts you want to give anybody? How can people get a hold of you or anything like that?
So you can get a hold of me. You can look up the directory for consulting foresters in the state of Indiana, and I'm on there. Just look for Michael Bane. I'm near the top, thankfully, thanks to my last name. It helps out a lot. Just look me up on there, the Indiana directory, and you can find me. You can find my phone number on my other contact information. If you have any questions, I like talking about trees. Just call me. That is no problem for me. And then overwhelmingly, I would say just one last thought is no matter where you live, what kind of habitat you have, if it's forested, if it's afforested, if it's more early succession, look at what your land used to be. Look at old maps, look at this, look at that, look at records of what habitat was this? What did it used to be? And how was it managed back then, whether just by God or by the natives or anything like that, and figure out, was my ground fire evolved? Did it have, was this a really not fire evolved, habitat? Am I in the UP of Michigan? Or, am I in South Central Indiana? And there could be, and that's a very fire evolved landscape, not just the prairie. Figure that out. Figure out what used to be on your ground, what should be there, what the plants that used to grow there, the ones that are native to your area. Learn your forbs, your wildflowers and stuff. Those are really good indicators. And then learn your valuable trees in your area. Learn your keystone species per se. Typically, that's going to be oaks if we're in the eastern United States. And go from there. And then reach out to some professionals and learn how to get your property going in the right direction. That's all I can ask for.
Well, Michael, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about prescribed fire. We didn't have a chance to do that on this episode. Unfortunately, our time ended up today, but we will have you back on and we'll talk a little bit about prescribed fires because I'm interested in that too. That's something we've been doing down here for years. And I know you guys are just kind of getting into it up there in Indiana.
Absolutely.
Up in the northern states. We'll definitely have you back on and talk a little bit about that.
Perfect. I would appreciate it.
Well, Michael, thanks for joining us, brother. I appreciate it. Dean, final thoughts?
No, it's, just to, exactly what Michael said, use the resources you have available. Landowners they're there. Just pick up the phone and call them, and the amount of stuff that you'll learn and the direction it'll help you maybe learn to go. You might have thought you were headed that way, and maybe you really need to go over here first is, just use the resources. They're there for a reason, and they're immensely helpful. So just don't be afraid to pick up the phone and ask for help. They're there for us as a resource.
Absolutely. Well, Dean, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for bringing Michael on. Michael, I appreciate you taking that time out of your day to do this. We'll have you back on for another episode for sure. So, guys, thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of the Basecamp Country Podcast. Don't forget to get a hold of Michael if you got any forestry questions. Follow Basecamp Country Real Estate on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you name it. We're out there at Basecamp Country. Don't forget, at Base Camp Country. It's more than just dirt. It's a lifestyle. We will see you guys next week right here on the Base Camp Country podcast. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Kix.